Hello. Hi guys, we're gonna get started. Last day, we're almost there. I'm Mani Sandhu and I've been with Marketo for 4 years now on the marketing operations team. And I support our North American marketing and sales teams, and I own scoring, nurture, and our instance hygiene.
And I'm Jackie Walts. I'm actually an independent consultant working with Marketo. My specialty is nurturing, and my clients have included companies like Autodesk, PlanGrid, Vianza Winery. And for the last 2 years, I've been setting strategy and writing content for Marketo's nurturing programs.
And so today we're going to do it like user groups, where we'll have a couple questions. I'll go over an overview of how we do things and then answer the questions that you've submitted, have you ask more questions, and then we can just meet at our tables and just exchange ideas, methods, and anything that you guys might do that contradicts what we do, because we want to hear what you guys are doing as well.
As in poke holes in our process.
Yes. So. All right. So first things first, a lot of the questions we get is, how do we do prospect nurture? This is essentially the breakdown of our North American process, and it's basically, we have 2 priorities. Priority 1, going over things that we need more data for. And so once people go through that, we actually exhaust them and we let them move to priority 2. The idea is that we refresh the content so no one gets exhausted, but if they do, we want them to continue to receive content. And so let's say if I was a C-level healthcare lead. So first I'd go through the vertical of healthcare, then I would move into the C-level SMB, since that's still in the same priority, if I've exhausted. Then I'd exhaust the SMB C-level, and then I'd move into probably enterprise B2B, or well, SMB B2B, just so that we can keep the conversation going. And this is a change that we made about 8 months ago. We were having a lot of issues with people being exhausted or just getting content that they kind of had already seen in the past. So what we've done now is changed it up. So 1, no one gets something they've already consumed in the past, but also they constantly are getting information from us.
And from a strategic side, what we're trying to do is personalize the conversation as people go through nurture as much as possible. So our assumption is somebody who is a C-level title at an enterprise company has different thoughts, needs, and pain points. Ditto if you're in a vertical, if we can talk to you on an independent industry basis, working through, rather than putting people into more generic content based on the company size.
And so we actually rely on segmentation. Every single lead in our database is in nurture, unless obviously you're opted out, but we don't want them to be in multiple tracks as a prospect. Reason being that our DG team is also sending a lot of content out, so we don't want to overwhelm anyone. That being said, I can prioritize the way that I want someone to receive content. And if, for example, I decided I wanted a new competitor, I can just go in, add in that new competition, and that would be it. And so we actually use, in order to move people from exhausted to another stream, checkboxes. So for example, C-level SB, I may not actually have the titles here. I have batches running to check off C-level SB. And so that way, when they get exhausted, my batch will then uncheck it, and then they would go and qualify for a different segmentation. Do all of you use segments now? Yeah, for the most part? No?
Some yes, some no.
Okay. If you are nurturing everyone and they're in multiple programs and you're relying a lot more on it than on email programs, you would not want to do it this way. This is only if you want mutual exclusivity, or you'd have like 5 different segmentations that people can run into. And then customer nurture is where we do allow a customer to be in multiple programs based on the products that they have. This is also a little bit different than in the past, in that we now have executive messaging. So we look at function, we look at your role at the company, and the first 3 months are really just on how to onboard them. As a C-level person, it would be something along the lines of how to enable your team using this product, versus a practitioner on how to actually use that product. And then obviously into the value messaging is very different. With an executive, it's why this product is really going to help your teams out. And with a practitioner, it's the how, getting them to actually adopt it. Adoption is a big one that you guys need to really consider in your customer nurture, because that's what's going to increase your retention. And then we can do this with every product, and then retention and upsell, you're sending messaging that's actually for products that are compatible, not just whatever other product we have out there. You want to think of what product they have now, and then send them messaging around the products that will be most useful at that time. And these were some of the questions that we had gotten. So we would just start here, and then we can move forward from there. Jackie, do you want to start from here?
Okay, so I'm new to Nurture. Where do I start? And I have a business card up here with my website if anybody wants it. I have blogs on a lot of these. You'll find I harp on one thing: set an objective. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Are you trying to move people to immediately be buying your product? Are you trying to warm somebody up for a sales team? Set both quantitative and qualitative objectives, meaning we have new leads and we want to reach out to them so that they know who we are and we build a brand presence with them, would be a qualitative objective. Quantitative would be out of X number of raw leads, we want to convert X% to MQL or SAL. So the absolute first thing you do is start by setting an objective, and then take a few minutes and try to think through what a story arc might be and where to start. A lot of companies do start with one nurture stream. It doesn't hurt to start with one to kind of be your test, to dip your toe in the water, and say, if somebody's going to engage with my company from the time they've heard about us to the time they buy, what is it they need to see? So the idea is to think that through. From there, you can build your content strategy, how often you touch them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. And then how many touches do we need in Nurture?
That varies. If you have a quick to sale product, I have one client I'm working with right now where people basically, it's, hi, that's your product, I'll buy it. That's 3 or 4 pieces. For an enterprise sale or a long lead sale or a high value B2C sale, you're probably going to need about 10 to 15 pieces of content in each segment of your stream. Normally there's an awareness, investigate, compare. So awareness, what is it that this does? Investigate, what does it do for me? Compare is, why should I buy this versus something from your competitor or doing it myself? So if you can shoot toward 10 to 15 pieces of content in each stream, that's going to give you plenty of time to bring people down the path.
And also cadence is going to be a big thing. If it's every week or every Tuesday and Thursday, you're going to need more content. And then what type of objectives should we set, and how do they vary based on channel?
So that would vary. Mainly your objectives are the same as the one you said at the beginning, but certain channels are going to need further objectives. So a good example is trade show. If somebody came up to you at a trade show booth, introduced themselves, asked to get a call from a sales rep, and is interested in talking about your product, that's an engaged prospect. Somebody who either was a registration list or just wanted to win the drone, those people, you're going to have to bring them all the way through and probably engage them a little bit more than somebody who came in through inbound search or third-party content posting.
And then how do you get prospects to move through Nurture faster? One of the things that we do is we have second and third touches. They don't actually live in the engagement program, but they're smart campaigns that are listening. So if you were to do the first CTA that is in Nurture, we'll send you another email within 24 hours. If you download that as well, another one within 12 hours, just to keep the conversation going. As you know, we have cadences. That can be an issue if somebody actually wants you to give them more. This is one way we're working on it, and obviously product is also going to change up the cadence options. But this has helped us a lot. We've seen a higher click rate all the way through from touch 2 down to touch like 4 or 5. And it's usually pretty consistent. And that's how we accelerate and get a lot more MQLs now. Yes?
So we're kind of wanting to move towards this and do less big nurtures and more small product-focused nurtures. And what our marketing team wants to do is basically allow them the more content they can consume, go through faster. And I found that difficult with using the engagement setup from Marketo to have them go out every day, but if they do something to move them faster. So basically what I was trying to do is set the stream to run every day and then move them throughout using smart campaigns. So that way, if they get it, download something today, in 2 days they would get an email versus if they don't do anything, they're going to get it 7 days later.
Right. So one of the things you can do is use email programs within your Nurture and then have smart campaigns that are letting people be pushed into them and having wait steps. So I'm going to go over that next, is that we use email programs for that reason, to have additional wait steps, choices, and based on industries, different things like that. That way you don't have every email asset living in your stream.
And from a content standpoint, what the experience might be for a prospect is, let's say we sent out the digital guide to social media and somebody opened it. depending on the different streams, anywhere from 10 minutes to 24 hours later, it's like you're interested in social media. How about a Twitter cheat sheet? Oh, how about the Facebook cheat sheet? Wait, you've responded to both of those? Do you want to do a demo? So it's kind of like every time they take an action, you give them another opportunity to take the next step.
And then the next question is, what do we track? That's essentially all the email metrics: opens, click-throughs, unsubscribes. We also track engagement, and that is through the engagement performance report. We don't use the engagement score because we use programs. That is a gotcha for a lot of people. If you're using email programs, and depending on how you set them up, the engagement score may not work. That's usually because ours is inflated, and I can tell you why after we get to that point. But engagement scores, it's a huge algorithm. It only works perfectly if you're actually using email assets in your streams. Are there any other things that we track?
I think that's it. And some of the things you wouldn't think to focus on a lot. Unsubscribes is big in nurture because you're working hard to warm somebody up so that they take a further action. If you look at your unsubscribe rates on individual pieces of content and streams, if you notice one is trending up, then the conversation you're having with your prospect or your customer isn't meaningful to them, and that's a very good indicator that you need to rethink what the conversation is.
And that being said, having your subscription center have an option of being opted into nurture is a good idea. Otherwise, people are going to mass unsubscribe from everything, which you may not want. That being said, if you've set up enough programs, you can also set up a cadence. Like, I want to be a nurture, but I only want to receive it once a month. A lot of retail companies do that, which I think is really effective. How do I exclude those that have already consumed the content through other channels? So most of our nurture actually redirects to our resource center, which our demand gen team also relies on. The way that we do it is by using email programs, or default programs, excuse me, and I think I have a picture of that. Yes. So usually docs will show you that first screenshot. We don't do that. We do that for certain programs, maybe like 1 out of the 80 streams that we have, only because those emails are directing to a place that no one knows how to get to unless they're in nurture. But otherwise, everything redirects to our resource center, every channel. And so the last thing we want to do is send somebody content that they've already downloaded in the past. So what I've done is basically every channel that's using that piece of content, I add a new flow step of change program status, add them to this program, and set them as a member. And so when a cast goes out, it's going to look at the membership of that program. Anyone that's a member, it's not going to send to. And you can do that with a lot of different things. So if you have certain people or job titles that you want to just exclude, either you can have smart campaigns saying if then, or you can just add them as members. That way you never have to worry about it again. And I can show you that on your laptops if you guys haven't done this before. Does anyone use email programs, default programs? Another reason to use it is for A/B testing. You can't do A/B testing if you can't use Champion Challenger within programs. So the way to use A/B testing is doing if-then statements within your flow steps. That being said, I think another gotcha is within a program, basically you're calling a smart campaign. If you have a smart list and someone doesn't qualify, they're basically in purgatory. They're never going to move to the next piece. So don't add additional smart list qualifications. If you have removed from flows and things, just do it in the flow. That's the best way to do it. We know people that have added stuff in the smart list, like if industry is sports, send this. Otherwise, do nothing. People get stuck there, and then they never move through the actual stream. So yeah, any questions on that? Oh.
I actually do that, and I've never seen anybody get stuck.
And does everyone qualify through the smart list?
Yeah, so we'll have 2 different streams. We have one marketing manager who really likes to send a reminder if people haven't already reached success.
Mm-hmm.
The first email program just sends on the regular cadence, and then the next cadence, the program triggers, and the smart list says if they're not yet a member of success, send them this email. That works, but I haven't seen them.
If you had nothing, so basically everyone in your smart list is qualifying for one or the other. If you had someone that basically can't qualify for your smart list, but they're actually running through that cast at that time, they won't go through the flow. And then they won't move to that third cast that you have. Yeah, so if you have that, you should do it in the remove from flow. If you do have people that you don't want to receive that email, it'll be like a break though. They won't get the next cast at that moment. Yeah. Or what you could also do is if you run a batch the night before, that's like just nightly recurring, that's looking at those that don't do anything, that may not qualify, you just add them as a member, that way they get the next cast. That's another workaround.
Quick bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so if you have a
yes.
question, grab a mic. There's one here and one
Sorry.
there.
And then I think Jackie had this.
Oh, this is my secret trick because
Yes.
as you can see, we have 11 zillion different nurture tracks and 11 zillion different emails. As you're putting together your nurture, put together a Word doc or an Excel spreadsheet that shows every piece of content that's everywhere. That way, when the 2015 Gartner report becomes the 2016 Gartner report, you don't have to click through each stream. I usually keep it by name of asset, name of email, and then a link to where they're located in Marketo. And that saves me hours and hours of time of fixing, replacing, managing my content.
And if you're using email or program assets, you may not have the naming convention properly, so you might just have, I don't know, the ultimate guide and not ultimate guide 2. And then some of the DG team doesn't know how to actually maneuver through an engagement program, so they don't know where to go after that. And then they have to come to us and ask like what's in here. If we have that Google Doc, we just send it along and they can find what they want to replace. And these are additional questions. What are some best practices for A/B testing nurture emails?
So from a strategic standpoint, one of the things to remember in A/B testing for nurture is how big your volume is. If you only have 5,000 people in the nurture cell, you really don't have enough to get a statistically accurate read. So make sure that if you're going to start doing some testing from a strategic standpoint in nurture, that your cells are large enough to do that. Second of all, as with any good demand gen, focus on things where you're going to be making the most impact. The offer, you're obviously not going to be testing lists because you're within a nurture stream. The offer and perhaps the subject line are big wins that you can modify. Don't test a green banner versus a blue banner or something like that. So focus on big things to learn from. You have to give it a few weeks and then move on from there to the next thing.
And then additionally, internally, we don't do A/B testing in engagement programs. We do in email programs as a send when we first go live with an asset. We'll see what worked, and then we just drop that into our engagement programs. I think we can cover the next one in our groups of how other Marketo users are using engagement and nurture programs for existing ops. What type of contents are they using to help in the SQL stage? You can probably cover a little bit of that too.
Which was the
opportunities.
For opportunities, again, it goes to the awareness, investigate, compare. So if somebody's in an opportunity, the first rule is just like a doctor, do no harm. The last thing you want to do is send out a nurture stream that breaks an opportunity for your sales reps. Even if they're not in the same office of you, that's really dangerous because they might hurt you. So ideally you work close with your sales team and try to get them to tell you what their pain points are and then also what somebody at that stage might want to see. Some of the content that Marketo uses and other clients that I've worked with is things like gaining executive buy-in, how to set up a PowerPoint presentation for your senior management on buying the particular product. And customer case studies, because customer case studies at this point are an opportunity to show other companies that are using your product successfully. And one of the ones we have in our current nurture streams that's kind of fun for Marketo is we do have a blog post from one of our power users that talks about how he started as a Marketo admin and is now a CMO and what Marketo was able to contribute to him personally for career growth. So look at things that might be meaningful to somebody who is in that last stage of buying, in this case, something that we're going right to them personally.
And then the next question's around pipeline and opportunity influence. Do any of you use the analyzers in the reporting section of Marketo? Because this all lives there. We have the opportunity influence analyzer and a program analyzer. Because we work with programs, I can use either, but if you have an engagement program, that by default should show up. But because we use program assets, I can look at it from an engagement program level and at a nurture, an actual content program level. We can also go into that at the tables because it's a little bit more complicated depending on how you have things set up. Do you normally set up engagement streams based on different types of content or different life cycle stages?
I think we kind of addressed that in the first one, but definitely. The whole idea is to make the experience of nurture, because it tends to be kind of set and forget. You really want to think it through, but you want it to speak specifically to your prospect or customer exactly where they are in their engagement and relationship with your company.
And then different regions will be impacted differently. So for our NOAM, Transition rules, they're very different than how we do things in Japan versus APAC, because life cycles tend to be longer for us out there. So you want to make sure that the transition, if you are cloning programs, make sure you update your transition rules. I've seen that a lot where people are like, I don't know how people are shifting. It's because they have the exact same rules from the initial original program that they had set up. What's your go-to when content is exhausted? Pause, switch to a new stream. Have you ever added that step after it's been running for a while? For one thing, we try not to have exhaustion happen. We have play owners that own each engagement program. So every DG member is aligned with one program that they have to constantly refresh. That being said, the way that we have it set up is if you are finished with one, we try to move you into our basic business unit one. We don't pause. Sometimes we pause when we have a lot of emails going out. So
Like Summit.
yeah, so for Summit, a lot of the last 3-4 months, we've been pausing things from Mondays and Wednesdays. That being said, we do have specific days that Nurture goes out on. It helps DG plan around that. And for us, it's usually the beginning of the week because communication limits do play a role. And we don't really we prefer Nurture to go out over some of the stuff that they're sending out. So most of the time it's gonna align anyhow, but that's a big one.
And then a lot of my clients are starting Nurture and have very little to work with. It's very nice for us at Marketo where we have unlimited content practically to say 10 pieces of content per stream. We do 3 streams. If you have less, you will exhaust. And a typical progression for where clients are coming up with their first nurturing program is they take their prospects and their customers through Nurture. And then at that point, what's often a very sustainable communication is a twice a month monthly demand generation email. Usually the first one is some sort of newsletter, 1 or 2 stories plus a content offer, and then a solo content offer sent at another time in the month. Usually in that case, it's either a repeat of a particular piece of content, or if you're thinking of building a webinar program, that's the perfect opportunity to do that.
Is there a balance between fully automated and personal communication? You put this really nicely earlier.
So Nurture is supposed to feel personal. It's supposed to absolutely feel like you're talking one-on-one, but it's automated. So you don't want to be in a position, particularly with limited marketing resources, of having to send out an individual email to each one of these people on a database send, meaning you have to sit there, set it up, and run it differently. But if you segment your audiences and come up with your story arc appropriately, it should feel very, very personal. Don't be afraid to put a survey in Nurture. For those of you that are fairly new customers, I think we're almost to the point in our customer Nurture where the surveys are going out. So if you get those, please respond. I'll look at the answers and see what you think. But it gives us an opportunity to make sure that those Nurture streams do feel that way.
And then what do people resonate the most with? Which content?
Okay, so this is why I make a lot of money as a demand gen consultant. I have 2 no-fail offers. First one, the dollars and cents of fill in the blank. That always wins. It doesn't matter if it's nanotechnology, data backup, it's always, always the dollar and cents of archaeology, whatever it is, it will always work. Second thing to test for folks that are in maybe an MQL sales accepted but haven't really converted is take a small segment of your customers or prospects that are ready to talk to a sales rep and show by their lead score that they're qualified. Test a $5 coffee card or Amazon gift card. It's not enough to get somebody who's not interested in your product to necessarily meet with your sales rep, but it is enough to get them when they're looking at the 10 things they have to do that day to say, you know what, I'm gonna take the 15 minutes and talk to that rep, or I'm gonna go watch the demo. So something to test.
Yeah. And I think that was all the questions that were submitted. Are there any additional questions? Nope. So basically, I'll go back to the questions. If you guys want to go over those at your tables or just cover anything else, we'll be walking around and we can just answer questions or tell you how we do it at Marketo. But otherwise, I think it's one of the biggest things I've seen is when I talk to customers, they teach us a lot of things that we should be doing that we didn't realize are like workarounds, or people find a lot of gotchas that we just, we either haven't tested, or engagement programs are really hard to test sometimes unless you set up a bunch of rules and create like dupes of yourself. So half the time we just hope it works. And it usually does because our docs are pretty good. Docs.marketo will help you primarily with a lot of the engagement questions that you have. Most of you should be on community as well. That's how I learned Nurture. It was kind of given to me a day before someone left, and I learned it solely based off of what community was offering.
And we do have a doc site specifically for Nurture. We have a microsite that lists both some content pieces and some best practices. So I would say look for that too.
Yeah, let me get you the mic. We're recording.
I just had a question about, you had mentioned doing different cadences or selections for opt-in. How do you then in the background, do you clone and then you have now 2, 3 multiple programs that you have to maintain the same email streams, but taking different cadences? I wanted it once a month, I wanted it, twice a week, et cetera?
Yes, so we do have different programs. We have checked the back end of our subscription center. So if you have checked one thing, you can only go and be part of the program that meets that cadence. And then afterwards, if you exhaust it, we're still working on that, is setting up additional campaigns and programs that have that cadence. Right now we only have 2, but otherwise we use checkboxes just because it's a lot easier versus someone overwriting data or our sales reps sometimes nulling things out. And then we have those preferences also on the Salesforce side. That way sales can also ask questions. And then they can drop people into those programs. And if it's something that's done by the source of Salesforce, that overwrites everything.
But as far as maintaining, you actually end up with 2 different programs that you maintain?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's simpler if you have just a few nurture streams, but that might be a segment, is if you can, ideally if you're trying to talk one-on-one individually to different people, giving them as much control over the process is going to just benefit your response rates.
And then utilizing MSI is big. You want your sales reps to be able to drop people into programs. A lot of times our data could be wrong. Maybe someone is part of an industry that we don't have listed. You want to give them options and have like a nurture folder where people can drop them in, and then that would take precedence over everything else.
I have two questions. Can you describe just your process for I guess the content that is created? If you create like a program for every content piece, like can you describe like who's involved and how that process is within your teams, and then how it's added to Nurture? You mentioned that you have thousands and thousands of pieces of content, so I'm curious on how you manage all that within, from a people and a resource perspective.
So from an organizational standpoint, we are broken down into marketing people responsible for particular audiences or segments. So we have somebody responsible for small business, somebody responsible for enterprise, somebody responsible for various verticals. And the way that we started out, and the reason that people wonder why there's a consultant at Marketo, is that it's hard for a company to have somebody own Nurture when so many people are players. So each of the individual stream owners, people who own that particular audience, are responsible for initiating and developing and working on the content. But for Marketo, I support them. So I go chase the guy down who's responsible for financial services and say, Joe, what you got? Let's put this together. Oh, you know what? We don't have a specific piece for this. Let's do this. So once they've been all set up, each of those different stream owners are then responsible with me backfilling and supporting them. So I think if your organization is fairly large, it's helpful to have one person responsible for Nurture and everyone else kind of support them as experts on content and that audience. And if your company's not, then each individual like audience owner is going to be the one to do that. Did that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Second question, as it relates to the many Nurture programs that you guys have, what kind of rules are you guys using to say, hey, you belong to this group and we're going to put you in this Nurture, as opposed to, hey, you also have an attribute here that might qualify you for this Nurture? Can you describe, some of the qualification rules or smart lists that you use to route people to Nurture programs?
Yeah, so one of the things we rely on is segmentation, and then we revisit this every quarter to see if anyone wants to add anything new or drop maybe, verticals under C-level SB, or maybe we want a new vertical, but segmentation is the way that we do it. And then for the majority of these, so everything that's based on B2C, B2B business units is by smart list. Everything above that is based on checkboxes because I want people to be able to shift. And so I have recurring batches that run about once every 2 weeks based on your cadence that look for, hey, has anyone exhausted this? Has their information changed? They should potentially move anyhow, but I will null out that box, and when that happens, segmentation will run again and then push them into something else. You can have smart lists, doing add to list, remove from list. We had that when I first started. It's not as effective just because those things aren't prioritized in your campaign queue. And so depending on your cadence, you want to also be aware that you're running batches in time to actually meet the cadence that you're setting, the cast that you're setting. So I would say I would recommend 3 days before. A lot of people, unless your processing is super fast because your database is really small, in which case you can do it the night before. But I would say 3 days before you want to run any batches that are going to null things out or push them into a program. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. And then with customers, we actually allow them to be in everything that they can potentially qualify for, just because we have more limited information there, but also we want them to get everything that they can about that product so they can start using it. Any other questions?
So if maybe you come up to a holiday week and you want to pause all of your nurtures, what's the best way you would suggest doing that?
Yeah, so since we don't have a pause option yet, I turn it off. I just turn it off from the program setup section, leave everything else on, and then I just send myself a reminder to turn it back on a few hours after that cast would have run on that holiday.
Do you do anything to the cadence? Do you just leave that
No,
all on?
we just leave it because it runs pretty often. You could change it if you really wanted to. You'll have better options once we have cadence flexibility, but no, as of now we don't. Because the chances are, not only because it's a holiday, but we don't really want to send them something the day after. We'd rather than just wait till next week because DG is already sending a lot of stuff as it is. So it really depends on your other programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you use a default program within a nurture stream, do you actually set up a campaign with a schedule on the email, or
No.
how does that work?
Yeah.
How does the person get the email? Once
You don't schedule anything. It honestly, it just picks it up by the arrow that's on the let's see. So you don't want to schedule it. Nope, right there. So that play button, once you drag that smart campaign from your program, it'll put a play icon next to that smart campaign in your program, and that's what it's gonna look for. It's just gonna call that smart campaign, and that's what triggers it. So you don't want to actually turn anything on. It's going to go based off. You don't want to turn it on because it's going to screw things up. You never schedule anything in the actual program itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one hint that I forgot to mention is we've had some luck in our nurturing programs in testing a Sunday afternoon or evening blast of content, particularly oddly to C-level executives. If somebody hasn't opened the email they got on Tuesday morning, we'll blast it again on Sunday, and we find a lot of folks do engage with email at that time.
It's not the exact same email. We have a second version that just says, you may have missed the last one. Anything else? Yes.
All right.
Do you mind coming up to the mic? Sorry.
The Marketo Olympics.
What do you guys do with leads that don't interact with your content or emails at all?
We let them go through the process, and if somebody hasn't engaged with anything for a set period of time, I think at Marketo it's a year, we send them what we call our activation emails, which is generally you start with something like a piece of content that you know is a winner, and then you send them something that literally says, do you want to be in, yes or no? And there's a process of that. I have a client that is doing that right now, and oddly, they're getting a lot of people who are re-engaging. Nothing's happened for a year, and sending them the email that says, do you still want to be in this database? They obviously still want to be friends. They just don't want to read the content. So ask them directly. Be careful when you do a reactivation not to send it to 90,000 names all at once, because you're likely to set yourself up for blacklisting. But if you test a small segment and roll it out over a period of time, if somebody's gone through maybe a 3 or 4 step reactivation campaign, don't market them. Marketing suspend at that point.
And if they go through and get reactivated, where do they end up in terms of, do they go back to the top of your nurture? Are they in a separate nurture? Do they see the same content? How do you make sure they don't?
So we currently have it that you would go right back up into something else. So based on our segmentation, if you're no longer part of the deactivation or the reactivation, you would fall into ideally one of the top priorities, which would be like the verticals or competitor. Otherwise, you would just get one of our basic business unit ones. Yeah.
So you kind of go back to where you would have been before you dropped
yeah.
off the face of the earth.
Hello. I just want to make sure I got this right. Earlier, you said that you don't do A/B testing in engagement programs, but you do it in email sends, and then you put the winner into the engagement program. Can you tell me why? What's the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, so because we use actual default programs, Champion Challenger doesn't actually work, which we learned the hard way, because we never had, the Challenger never went out. And so unless you're using it for an email asset within your stream, it'll work, but if you're using programs, it doesn't function. And that's something that they're working on fixing. But for now, if we did random samples within a smart campaign, that would work. Otherwise, if you did a organic email batch program and you sent it out, that would work as well. But not with Nurture itself, if you're using a program as an asset. Yeah.
And part of that is a philosophical approach from Marketo, where we have a wealth of content. And when something new comes out, we will often use it as a way to engage folks that are in our general database. And that gives us the opportunity to get a test very quickly on how it's working. So we don't go to the pretty sizable effort of developing a particular email and putting it into all the Nurture campaigns until we know it's a hit.
We actually have the opposite problem. We don't have a lot of content. Would you recommend that, or would you recommend, because right now we do A/B testing within the engagement program, but we're only using emails, we're not using default programs.
I mean, from a technical standpoint, you could. Yeah, I mean, that should be fine. So you don't use those pieces of content in your actual email programs as it is? You're not testing it anywhere else?
We have email sends, but we do have a few kind of evergreen nurtures, and then within those we have content, and just to see what's working best. Mostly it's just to see which one we can get open, so they're mostly subject line A/B tests, but I just wondered if it would be recommended within the Nurture.
Yeah, I mean, if you're using email assets, then go for it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's just one of the things that we had learned that it doesn't work with programs.
Okay.
And most companies don't have a lot of content. So, you know, I have 2 or 3 clients that do and 2 or 3 clients that don't. So work with what you've got and then build it over time. I mean, start with whatever you have available and your Nurture will grow.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes.
So you guys said you don't leverage the engagement score?
Yeah.
Because, and so we don't either. And so I guess just wondering how then do you guys what kind of reporting do you guys do to make sure to see if how does a whole engine, how is it doing? And then and also on a content level within the stream?
Yeah, so because we use programs, we can actually use the program analyzer and the opportunity influence analyzer. And then all the email metrics are good too. So we do that at each content level and then as an aggregate data point. The engagement score is really interesting. It's like a huge formula that I don't really understand. So I don't even know what a good score is. I'm assuming it's just, I do it based off the color. If it's green, great. Otherwise, but I've noticed that most people's usually is between 45 and 55. I don't know, and unless it's using a program, in which case it's inflated. So ours all look like 88s and 90s. It doesn't really mean much. Plus, it takes a really long time to update if people are using it. It can take up to an additional cast for it to update the score. But otherwise, we just use basic reporting in analytics. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I would definitely recommend cloning a engagement performance report into all of your programs, depending on who's owning it. That way they can continue to look at it. And the minute you actually clone it into that program, it should already set it up to show each stream and a breakdown between all the different early, mid, late, and then each piece of content. So, and then unfortunately, if you're using second and third touch triggers, that will not be a part of it. So that's kind of what we're dealing with right now, is we're manually having to like combine the email performance report with our engagement stream performance reports. But hopefully that'll change with the new releases.
So right now, it's a lot of kind of manual work right now.
Yeah.
And the support needed to do the manual work is, first of all, creating the report. And then additionally, what we found at Marketo is it's not useful just to get the report. You need to have somebody who is the nurture team owner actually read it and send out an executive summary, or ping the people that have streams that are in trouble, because everyone's busy. A huge Excel spreadsheet is intimidating, and without somebody to help interpret it can almost be useless. So you really need to make the commitment to develop it and socialize it.
And then I have heard some customers using like a nurture score. So it's a score that's only for nurture. So either you can do it by stream, by product, maybe you combine a few of the streams to look at engagement across based on like what your MQL threshold is, to see if anyone is becoming an MQL more, like 80% of nurture being the reason for that. I haven't used that, but I think it's a really cool idea. That's one way to do it. It's just setting up a whole model just for nurture scoring.
Okay, and then I do have one more question that's not related to reporting, but as far as your prioritization for the different nurture streams you have, specifically, like how do you, so like verticals and competitor nurture streams seem to be very important. How do you know if, say, like who should go to what? What if a person qualifies for a really hot vertical, but they're also, looking at another competitor too?
Yeah, so we've decided verticals are more important because it's more personalized as to how we can benefit you based on your account and the type of industry that you're in. If you were to exhaust that, I uncheck that box, and then you would move into the competitive one. And if you run through that, you would then move into one of the other segments. So, but we've decided that verticals is more important. But that being said, if a play owner isn't refreshing content, chances are they're going to hit both of those.
And vertical is something that we would get as feedback from sales on what they think the better story is, and that's a good place to look at your content. Marketo is extremely cautious about developing competitive content. So if we were extremely aggressive, we might make that a higher priority. If we had 20 pieces that said Marketo versus HubSpot, learn the truth. But because that's not an approach that we use as a company, and our content in that area is a little softer, we're going with things that are probably going to be more effective at convincing people to convert.
And then the logic is different for other regions. This is North America. In EMEA, you can't actually use the name of a competitor, so technically it's not as effective because we can have multiple streams. So that would actually probably be like further down and not as much of a priority. But it really depends on the region. And they have to give us feedback, and then the legal things and all that have to be considered.
Yeah. Thank you.
And data.
Okay.
We don't have as great of data in certain regions, so we can't actually have a great breakdown. So.
And that's one of my first conversations with a client who's starting Nurture is, what is your objective? What is your story arc? And by the way, how many people do you have in that financial services stream? 9? Maybe not. Let's move to something else. So.
And just to clarify, when you said checkbox, so you have each of these segmentations as a field checkbox for a contact, and whenever they exhaust, you uncheck that segmentation, so they move to the next priority based on, I guess, a smart list or a campaign that you have running?
Yes, so the top 5 have checkboxes, and only because we do want them to be able to shift. So yeah, I have a C-level ENT Boolean field. And then I have that checked by default if you qualify, and then I have a recurring batch. I would not set them up as triggers because you do have cadences. You don't need this to be in super real time. It's just an additional processing burden. I would have it run like maybe once or twice a week, depending on how many people qualify. But yeah, it's just I have a huge smart list that's looking for multiple things. Either we have a backlog, for example, and our segmentation isn't updating fast enough on its own. I will just do like, are you still have a C-level title? Are you still part of that business unit? Or are you still normal in that engagement stream, or are you exhausted? And then based on that, I'll continue to keep rechecking it or unchecking it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then also when you add new content, do you want the people to move back into it? That's another conversation to be had. Chances are we don't do that because all of that content is already being pushed out to people that qualify for it. through our email sends. And so I don't feel the need to go and push them back into a stream because we have a new piece of content, because chances are they'll get it organically. Yeah. Any other questions? What time do we have? We have 8 minutes. This is where we usually let people do breakdowns and start talking amongst themselves about the things that they're working on, and then we can just walk around and answer questions. So if you guys want to combine tables, you're welcome to, but it seems like most of the tables are pretty full as it is. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you.